Hi friends, I'm Abby and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the Licanius Trilogy and should you read this, should you start this epic fantasy trilogy by James Islington. So the way I will structure this review and should you read is I will talk a little bit about the plot, I will talk about some of my personal pros and cons, which will hopefully help you decide if it's going to be a series for you, and then my overall thoughts at the end. The plot of the Licanius Trilogy. It's quite complex, as it's quite a complex fantasy story, but it is a epic fantasy and you're set in this world following four main characters, but at the beginning you're only presented with three. So I'll talk about those in this summary. And you're introduced to them in a school setting. So 20 years prior to the start of this series, there was a conflict or confrontation between magic users within this world and non-magic users. And it came to a point where magic users are now controlled or they're now documented, and there is an overseeing administration from non-magic users. And so you're following three students in the school who are training to become magic users and training in their magic. So there's definitely magic within this world, and there is a little bit of a school setting, but that is basically just where it starts. And then there is this threat from beyond the wall, this growing threat that has been building. It is sort of alluded to that this was a threat from years past, many years past, and it is rising up and coming back. And so you have this sense of tension throughout that there is this threat. The three characters that we meet in the beginning are Davian, Weir and Asher. So those are the ones that we meet in the school. I will say that Davian is probably one of the biggest of the main characters. And so you are following them and their journey, starting in the school and then as things escalate across other parts of this world. And there are a lot, and by I mean a lot, there are a lot of twists and turns. So that is the start of the book, and I feel like saying too much more would be getting into spoilers. Yeah, it's one of those books where there is a scene in the first 50 to 100 pages and then that shifts the plot and the dynamics of the book. For me, that scene was a complete surprise. I know that it is within the first very first beginning of the book, so maybe for some it's not considered a spoiler, but for me I really enjoyed not being aware of it going in, and so that's why I find it a little bit hard to talk about, because there is that scene at the very beginning which shifts the direction of the plot. If you're anxious about starting the series, maybe give it until that I can't remember, maybe 50 page mark, 100 page mark, and see how you feel about that shift in direction. At least for me, as soon as I read that scene, and I think it's quite obvious what scene it is, I was like, what is going on here? And instantly I have to know what's going to happen next. So it really hooked me. So some of my pros and my pros for the series as a whole is the development and the arcs of our principal characters. I was like, what is going on here? And the thing is, you can really see how the characters develop, and you can see how they have changed from the first book when they were first introduced and to the third and final book. You can really see how they have developed, and I think there are some really interesting arcs. Obviously I can't really talk about them too much because that would be spoilery, but there are some very interesting paths that our characters go down, and it's really interesting to see how they change from the first book to the third book and see how both they shape the circumstances and how circumstances shape them, and how they develop and how they grow as characters, and how they grow as how sometimes you're questioning what they're doing and why they're doing certain choices, but I think that the direction of all the characters was really interesting to follow. It made for a really interesting story because I was invested in, I think, all of the characters throughout the whole of the trilogy, and seeing where they were going to go next and seeing what was going to happen to them. And I will say as well, it is an expansive world. There is a lot going on within the world, and it's really interesting. I don't think that the world is particularly unique in its setting or the development of the world, but I enjoyed it. It is quite just a classical epic fantasy, medieval British setting. You have various kingdoms that have various opinions on magic, with some kingdoms or countries being more restrictive towards magic users and killing all of the magic users within their country, some of them being more open towards magic. So there is that dynamic, and I feel as though the threat from beyond the wall, that theme is common enough in fantasy. So I wouldn't say that world building is necessarily unique, but I found it enjoyable. And then one of my big pros for this series is the twists and the turns. There is always something going on. There is always something going on with one of the characters. There is so many twists and so many turns. Some of them I predicted, some of them I really did not predict. Some of the time my brain was like, what is going on here? So I'd say that this book is very good for theorizing and seeing what you can predict, because some of it I think is predictable and some of it I'm like, how does this happen? How does this work? So I think it's really fun for that. There is so many twists and so many turns and so much going on. And so it makes it that, because it is a multi-perspective story, I always wanted to get back to like all of the characters. I was like, well, I want to know what's going to happen with all of you, because you've all got something going on, and you're completely compelled to keep going and keep getting back to different chapters. I'd say the chapters aren't too long, they're not too short, they're quite a good length. And so this does lead into like a pro and a con, depending on who you are as a reader and where you are at with your fantasy journey, because I will say that this is complex. There is a lot going on. There is a lot to keep a track of, both in terms of characters, because some of them do have different names, and so you get a character in your head with one name and actually they have other names that other characters refer to them as, and some people had different names in the past. So there is a lot to keep track of, both in terms of the characters and in terms of the magic and in terms of just the events of what is going on. There is a lot to keep your brain engaged. So that's why I say it's really good for theorizing, because there's so many different little details that are interspersed throughout the books. And there's just a lot to get your teeth into. So I think it will have reread value. I've only read this series once, so each book once all the way through, but I expect this will have a lot of value on reread. There'll be a lot of fun seeing things and seeing what I didn't pick up on as a first-time reader. The con of this though is that it can be confusing, that you do have to pay attention or you could easily miss something, that there is a lot to unpack within the stories, and that you do have to have your brain engaged, I think, to understand or to follow the whole story, which is why I don't think this is a very good story for beginners to fantasy. I think if you haven't read that much fantasy, I think this series could be quite overwhelming, because there is a lot to keep track of, and it's not, I personally don't think it's a great entry point for fantasy. But if you have been an avid reader of fantasy, you're adept at reading fantasy, you know what you like, then I think this is a great series for you, but potentially one that you pick up physically, or at least with an immersion read. I am not sure how well I personally would do if I had just listened to this on audiobook. That might just be a personal thing for me. I struggle with reading fantasy audibly, especially for the first time read. So if you are like me and that you don't read too much fantasy on audio, then I would not recommend this as an audio only fantasy series. I think it really does benefit from having eyes on the page. And I would also recommend as well that if you are reading this, that you read the books relatively quickly in quick succession, because there is a lot of plot threads, and so it does benefit to read them closer together. Otherwise, I could see confusion happening between the books. There is a very good summary that is in books 2 and 3, which I think was amazing. It was a very detailed summary of prior events. And even though I did read these books in pretty quick succession, I did really enjoy having that summary there. But I particularly feel like if you had to wait a long time between the books, then you would really struggle getting into the next one. Another sort of pro/con is the writing style. And I enjoyed the writing style, but I don't think the writing style is going to work for everyone. I think it is very much as a reader, it will either work for you or it won't. For me, I'd say this is quite a direct writing style. It's not overly flowery, it's quite to the point. And I think it will work for readers that generally enjoy Brandon Sanderson or John Gwynne, so that more direct writing style. if you prefer a more flowery writing style, then I'm not sure that this would be the series for you. So I'd recommend it if you like Brandon Sanderson, John Gwynne, then I think this would be a good series for you if you're trying to fill that void. But if those authors are not for you, then I don't think this series will work for you. I mean, it might, but there we go. I cannot comment on this being compared to Wheel of Time because I have personally not read Wheel of Time. So I can't comment on how the writing styles compares to that or the plot of Wheel of Time. So overall, for me, I gave these all sort of 4.5 stars. And I really, really enjoyed it. I really thoroughly enjoyed my time with this series. The reason it's not like quite a full 5 stars is because I did find it a bit confusing. Even as someone that has read quite a lot of fantasy. But I would be interested to see how I feel about it on reread and see if that reread experience would increase my rating, because I feel like it could, because there's probably a lot that I didn't pick up on. So it would be really interesting to see how I feel on reread. But I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really liked seeing our characters. I really liked seeing our characters grow. I really liked the magic and the world and just seeing the twists and the turns. I do have a sort of semi-spoilery buzzword. So if that's all you really want to know about it, then go away now. It's not like super spoilery, and I think just hearing the phrase by itself wouldn't be a spoiler. But I think it's quite a fun, interesting, I think it's quite fun. So either go away now, or if you're interested in hearing the semi-spoilery buzzword, then stick around. So that buzzword is time travel or playing around with time. And I'll just leave it at that. Like, that theme is within these books, and I think it's so fun. I think it's so fun. I just really enjoyed those scenes and seeing how that worked within the magic system. So hopefully, just by saying that, it's not too spoilery, and it is explored in like the first book, but it doesn't come in until like the 50% mark. So that's why I put it as like semi-spoilery, but I think without any context, then you're not going to really get that much from that. So there we go. There are my thoughts and a sort of should you read the Licanius Trilogy. Let me know if I've helped you make a decision on if you think this series will be for you, if you're going to pick it up and give it a try, because I would love to hear about more people picking this up, because I do feel like it is quite underrated and I don't hear that many people gushing about it. And I definitely think that it's worth it. Like, if you enjoy Brandon Sanderson and John Gwynne, then I really do think that this series would be a really great one to get into. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my future videos. Bye!